Hi everyone, in today's video we're going to talk about how to factor polynomials using the dots method. So here's today's FLT. Given polynomial expressions, I will be able to factor them by using the dots method. So you're probably wondering, what exactly is dots? So dots is short for difference of two squares. So when you hear difference, you probably think of subtraction if you're thinking about math. So it's the difference of two squares. So if you see a polynomial like this, you're going to factor using the dots method. And by the way, doesn't this low-key look like a face, kind of? And so the general form after you factor using dots is going to look something like multiplying two binomials together. So it's like something plus something, and then times the something minus something. So let's look at our first example. We are going to factor x squared minus 8 squared. So notice here we have the difference of two squares. So we can use the dots method. And when we factor using the dots method, it's going to look like this form that I'm writing right here. So I'm going to write out the bases of each term. So there's the x and the 8, and then inside both parentheses I write the x and the 8. So the format I wrote earlier, x plus 8 and x minus 8. So one thing I want you guys to be careful about is the format after you factor out. So you could write it as x plus 8 times x minus 8, so this is okay. You can also write it as x minus 8, then x plus 8, so this is also okay. However, you cannot write something like 8 plus x and then 8 minus x. So you can't switch the terms around in that sense. So this would be incorrect. And if you're curious as to why, go ahead and multiply it out and you'll notice that it does not equal x squared minus 8 squared. Okay, so in this example, we are going to factor b squared minus 5 squared. So can we use dots here? We notice that there's a difference of two squares. So yes, we can factor using the dots method. And then the bases, we have this b and the 5. So I'm going to write it in here. And then so we have b plus 5 times b minus 5. So again, we used the dots method to factor this polynomial. So go ahead and try this one on Edpuzzle. Factor c squared minus 2 squared. Okay, so for this next example, we are going to factor x squared minus 25. So notice here we have a difference, but it's not a difference of two squares. But what we can actually do is rewrite this as dots. So we can rewrite this as a difference of two squares. So x squared just stays the same, minus 5 squared, because if you notice, 25 is a perfect square. So now we have a difference of two squares with the bases x and 5. So we're going to write it in this format. So we have x plus 5 times x minus 5. Or we can always write this as x minus 5 and x plus 5. So the idea here is that even if it doesn't look like a difference of two squares at first, sometimes you can rewrite it so that you can use the dots method. Okay, go ahead and try example 5 on Edpuzzle. Please factor a squared minus 49. So up next, we're going to take it one more step. So we will factor 9x squared minus 64. So right here, there is a difference. So it's just a matter of rewriting it as a difference of two squares. So let's rewrite that. So it's going to look like something squared minus something squared. So let's look at the easier part first. Since 64 is a perfect square, I'm going to write 8 right there. On the left side, that 9x squared. So what goes inside the parentheses is 3x, because notice that 9 is also a perfect square. So now, don't just look at the variable, but make sure you're also looking at the coefficient. And now, since we have the difference of two squares, I'm going to rewrite it in the form that we have been using. So still the same thing, we just had to do a little extra work in the rewriting part. Okay, so the bases of the two terms up here, so we have that 3x and the 8. So let me write it down here. So we have 3x plus 8 times 3x minus 8. Okay, so next example, kind of similar. We're going to factor 81x squared minus 16y squared. So again, right here, I notice a difference. So I just got to rewrite it as a difference of two squares. So again, something squared minus something squared. Alright, so the 81x squared, since 81 is a perfect square, we're going to write it as parentheses 9x squared. And then the 16y squared, notice that 16 is a perfect square. So now we have this form that looks like dots, difference of two squares. So let's just write it in that usual format. So the bases of the two terms, we have the 9x and the 4y. So 9x plus 4y times 9x minus 4y. And then last example on Edpuzzle, please factor 4a squared minus 100b squared. Alright, so just as a quick review, so if you're using the dots method, you can factor a polynomial into this format, but you can only use it if it's a difference of two squares. So please be careful on that. Good job, and be sure to submit your notes.